We've had some huge deer on trail camera over the years. Some we found, some have disappeared. These are our biggest bucks ever on trail camera. Let's talk about them.
We're gonna go in order from smallest to the biggest ever, okay? And first up is the biggest ever 3-point that you have ever seen.
This 3-point I found fairly close to the road on public land in Texas. We threw a camera out there. I think I put it out there in August real quick because I had one to use. Stopped on the side of the road, threw it out there, and I did not actually go back to this camera until January. And on the 4th, I pulled the camera and discovered that we should have been hunting here the whole year.
This property's hard to hunt, so we didn't spend a lot of time there, but as evidence shows here, we should have been. We could have killed what is a mondo, a deer I would mount, right? Big old 3-point buck. When deer get really, really old, sometimes this thing happens where their antlers get weird and they don't end up getting shot because they don't really score very high, but in my opinion, this is a huge trophy. He very well may have died of old age.
The next buck is called Teenager. This is a buck that in 2017, I believe, right after in postseason, I found this deer near an ag food source, near a wheat field on public land in Texas. Found him in the dark and traced him back for a couple hundred yards and found him in daylight during the off season there. Came back in 17, 18, and even hunted him in 19 and could never actually see this buck. Neither one of us ever saw him in person, though we have lots of history and tons of trail camera pictures over 4 different areas in this buck's life. He potentially was moving around and off the property quite a bit because it's not a big property, but he did have roads on both ends and open pasture on the other end, so I couldn't believe we never saw this buck.
Lots of private land around where this deer was, and a lot of hunting pressure on the public ground as well, so there's a good chance this deer got shot by somebody. I mean, he wasn't a super high scorer in his older age, but he still was a really impressive buck. The next buck is a buck that I coined Mass Monster. He was kind of a weird looking deer, and the first picture we got of him, he was like right in your face, so it kind of was almost scary. And this is a buck that I hunted for 2 years on public ground, never saw in person. This public also has a lot of pressure throughout the year at different times, so there's a good chance that this deer got shot, but we did have 2 years of pictures of him up until last year, so there's a chance he's still alive. The next buck is a big wide deer that we found on Texas public land, but it's a place that's kind of hard to access. It's kind of weird, and you might spook deer when you're going in there. I hunted it one time, forgot my platform, didn't have a good hunt, but pulled the card, and sure enough, we should have been there.
This buck was crossing a secondary creek crossing in the area, going along the main stem of the creek, and he was very close to private, so there's a high chance this buck got shot during rifle season.
The next deer is a deer we found in Kansas on a piece of private permission. We were able to put out bait stations and set up cameras and just do the cool thing where you get to take a lot of inventory of the deer on the property, and sure enough, there was a giant 8-point that showed up. He broke off a brow tine about halfway through the season, but he still had a big old frame, and it's a deer that actually got the chase. There's no trees on the property. In fact, the landowner thought that it would be impossible to bow hunt on the place when we talked to him, but we decided to try it anyways. And I got within bow range of this deer, really close on the ground. Did have some other things happen that were pretty interesting that made it to where I ended up not shooting this deer. But there's a pretty good chance that this deer is still alive. We have pictures throughout the season of this deer way on into the winter. Now, there's bad blizzards in the area during the winter, so who knows, but we might get to see him again one day.
In 2020, I hunted a new private property here in the East Texas area and had bucks all over it. One of the bucks I called the King Buck. He was awesome. He was the dominant buck in the area, probably 5 or 6 years old, big barrel chest, and he had, I think, 11 points, 10 typical. And I actually came full draw on this deer, and he spooked when I grunt stopped him. Otherwise, I would have shot this deer and not a bigger one that you'll see later here on this video. But late in the season, at the very end of the season, we have a long rifle season here in Texas, and I found out that one of my neighbors shot this deer and did not find him. So that's the demise of this buck.
The next deer at the time was possibly the biggest deer I'd ever seen on the hoof. He's a giant 8-point. He came in on a windy day. It's a piece of private ground, a tiny little wood lot in a huge area of agriculture, and this deer was probably bedding in that little wood lot. So we set up a camera in there just trying to see what was going on in the area, and sure enough, had the deer on camera, had the deer coming in, saw him in person, but it was just too windy to take a shot that day. And then we had him on camera a few times throughout the next few years, but Ultimately, it disappeared. I do know there's some outfitting in the area, so there's a real good chance that that buck got shot, potentially by a rifle. One of the things that we like to do is summer scouting. Sometimes it pays off big time. One time in Illinois, I found a perennial scrape in the summer. It's like an area that you can tell the deer spend a ton of time scraping throughout the year. There's still a licking branch there. We hung a camera on that licking branch to just soak all late summer and into the fall, and sure enough, found a couple giants on that camera.
There was a lot of daytime activity on this camera. I actually had a friend that was within a couple hours go and check this camera and pull the card for us and told us that this was awesome and we should be up there hunting at some point. So with that in mind, I made plans in late October, actually mid-October, and held off till late October when we had a really good cold front come in. This particular spot hunted well on a northwest wind, which was perfect for what we needed, and it was what we needed to get the deer moving on their feet during that late October window. A giant buck came in who had a funky side and stood 8 yards from me and ended up looking up at me and a big old giant Sasquatch camera guy with me. Two Sasquatches were in that tree, and he spooked, but when he spooked, the 8-point that was with him switched spots with him and didn't know what was going on, and I drilled the 8-point at 8 yards. And that's the story of both of these bucks, one of which I think, the big one, might still be alive, as my friend still feels like he has trail camera pictures of that deer to this day.
Speaking of summer scouting, in 2020, Tyler and I embarked on a challenge. We call it the Map Scout Challenge. It's a video series on our YouTube channel. Check it out if you're into scouting for big giant whitetail bucks. Aside from there, where to put a camera.
I like it.
All right. But we travel the country finding unique places to look for big giant bucks using our map scouting abilities. And sure enough, we were in Illinois and found a spot that was in the big timber, but it backed up to a agriculture food source, and decided to hang a camera there, and we got what is one of the bigger deer that we have on camera. He's a giant buck. He was in there often, but we never ended up going back and hunting him. It was just kind of far from home, and it was hard to get to. But super cool to see that scouting mission paid off. There's a good chance that deer never got shot, or he's walking around up there as like an 11-year-old right now, because it's so remote in the big woods. They're so hard to hunt. I don't know what happened to that deer. In 2021, my friend Tyler and I hunted Kansas, and we had since joined up forces with Eric, and we were roaming around the plains looking for big giant deer, and sure enough, we found one out on just the open flat with those. He was just the absolute monarch of the plains, and we actually saw this deer before we hung the camera, but we hung a camera to try to get a pattern on the deer, to try to understand how he was using a particular property. There was a big area of scrapes up against a windrow, and sure enough, that deer was hitting those scrapes sometimes at least during daylight, depending on the wind and some other factors. This deer was around quite a bit, but we never could get really within range of the deer. We saw the deer a ton. We did have him run by one evening, very close, but he was just chasing does, no shots being made, and I don't know what happened to the deer. He's out in the wide open country. There's a lot of private ground around there. Maybe he got shot, or maybe he died of old age, because the winters are harsh in Kansas.
The next buck made our most popular video for deer hunting on our channel. This buck is what we refer to as the ranch buck. And the same year that I hunted the king was the year that I hunted this buck. There was a lot of big bucks on the property at that time. And I actually had a virus. I had been diagnosed with it, and this was during the outbreak, right? And so, I think it was November 12th, I had nothing to do but sit in my truck on the property and look. And if I'd have been hunting that day from my tree stand, I could have killed 3 really nice bucks, and one of which was the ranch buck. That was the first day I saw him, and he was chasing does, and it was awesome. The footage is awesome that I was able to get from it. I really cherished this footage, and I spent the next 18 days or so chasing this deer until November 30th. And I actually had an encounter with him at 49 yards where I decided to pass. Because I had his doe at 20, and they just got mixed up with another buck, and he never ended up closer than 49. So passed him, and then on the 30th was able to take him at 30 yards. This buck is very close to my biggest buck ever that I've shot, but I think there might be one that's even bigger. And then the very next year, I had a deer on trail camera early that might have been bigger than the ranch buck. And this buck right here just shows up. I think this might have been the only sequence I had from him, was this picture right here in the dark. But I expected that as the season went on and the rut showed up, he would come back and explore some of the areas that he had already been to earlier in the year. The problem is more and more people moved around me after seeing the ranch buck video release, and there was a lot of hunters in the area. There's a high chance with our 8-week rifle season that this buck was shot at some point, and I never got to see him again.
The next buck is a deer that we again found in a big woodlot. He probably was bedding somewhere close in some type of a waterway system and would only visit just at night. It was kind of one of those ghost deer that you just dream about. Big giant buck with an extra main beam that comes way out. I can remember plotting, making all kinds of decisions about how we'd approach the thing, hoping to get him in daylight, and he just never showed. Again, it's an area that has a lot of hunting pressure, both from public and private, and there's probably a good chance that deer got shot by somebody because he would be on some people's list for sure. Again, on the Map Scout Challenge, we were in Ohio. We had just torn up this piece of public ground. It seemed to get a lot of hunting pressure, but there was still quite a few deer around. It's a nice mix of like river bottom and also some agriculture. So we went way back to a back corner and just hung a camera in what we thought would be a staging area for this bean field. And sure enough, a lot of bucks started showing up on camera early in the season, and one of them is potentially one of the biggest bucks we ever have had on camera. Now, he's still in velvet, so he looks absolutely huge, but he is absolutely huge. Like, this deer would just be the deer of dreams, especially in a state that has over-the-counter public land tags. I mean, this deer was a monster. Good chance this deer got shot because, again, like I said, it's public ground and there's a lot of hunters in the area. It's pretty close to one of the big urban areas, so I would say that somewhere along the line somebody found a way to put an arrow or a bullet in this deer.
This next buck was on a wide open property on a lease we had in Kansas for a while, and we had Mike Papik from Axeman actually come hunt with us, and somehow we had a mutual connection there. Well, Mike shows up and shoots a deer that has showed up within a few days span there that I really wanted to shoot. It hurt my feelings bad. This was a really nice buck, probably 4 years old, and he was like a 165. I mean, a very solid deer. Mike made a great shot. After stalking him with his buddy. That was our mutual connection, and so this buck is dead, and T. Jones didn't get to shoot him. On this same property a few years prior, I actually hunted a buck that I called the Empire buck because his antlers were so tall it was like the Empire State Building, and I think actually my buddy Cody named this buck. He had just a knack for naming bucks when we would hunt together, or I would send him pictures. But this deer actually showed up one day with me in a ground blind that had a peephole in the back of it because it was on the edge of the property, and we weren't going to shoot on the other side of the property, so we did not have a shooting window in that direction. He was eating in a wheat field very early in the day on a cold, brisk, bright November day, and I never could get him to come around the other side of me so I could get a shot at him in the tall grass. So unfortunately, I don't really know what happened to this deer. I had some trail camera pictures of him over the course of that year and then never saw him again. There's probably a better chance that he died of natural causes than that he died of a rifle or an arrow at some point. So don't really know what happened to him though.
The next buck is a big, giant plains deer from Kansas. He's massive, he's huge, he has big light-colored antlers. I think he has 36 million points, and he's a mainframe 8. People all over the internet claim this deer. They say that maybe even Chris B shot this buck, but I actually know the guy who arrowed at this deer.
We had found this deer a couple days prior to me actually hunting this deer. It was insane that we had a wind that didn't allow me to hunt the property I'd been focused on. For the majority of that trip. I was super sick, and I was just out there laying under the stars in the cold one morning on that public piece, just waiting on it to get light. And as it did, as usual, you start seeing some deer in this open landscape, and I see a buck with a couple of does nosing around. Put the glass on it, and it's a very big deer. And at the time, I actually didn't think that this deer was nearly as big as he is and what he scores. I had no clue he had 18 points, right? Because like K.C. said, mainframe, you know, he has a lot of junk is what it boils down to. Anyway, Eric and I go to walking after this deer, and after I marked him on OnX, and we pretty much walked to within 100 yards by using the terrain, and I got to 50 yards, and we just sat there for about 45 minutes. And Eric goes, "What was that?" He heard a weird noise. I look up, this buck's sitting there, standing up, looking directly away. None of the does can see me. I sit up, I had prepared for this, pull back, take aim, and make probably the most perfect shot I've ever made in my life at 50 yards, and it has probably produced the most views. Maybe, I don't know, this is a bold statement, but one of the most viewed deer hunting shots probably that there is on the internet, between all the accounts that have shared it and our accounts as well. Truly blessed experience for me, for sure.
We know what happened to that one.
We do. He ended up on the wall. He's actually right down there. That doesn't make sense. People don't know we're upstairs.
Here in deep East Texas, there's a lot of hunting pressure, and sometimes you have to look for overlooked spots on public ground, and sure enough, we strike out a lot doing that. But every once in a while, it works well, and we found a place just like that. We went into this spot, kind of overlooked. No one really hunts there very much. There's a lot of swamp and stuff like that around, but we found a place to hang a camera that was kind of, again, at one of those secondary creek crossing type places, and sure enough, got some deer pictures on it, and we got pictures of a giant Texas deer. Huge brow tines, wide frame. Tyler, I don't know what to say about this deer.
He's a monster, and in fact, we spent quite a bit of time the next year or so hunting this deer in that area because he was also a daylight buck, which doesn't happen very often. This buck has everything that a deer you would want in a deer, pretty much. We're guessing that this deer scores higher than any other buck we've had on camera so far, and it's likely that he did. I mean, he's got everything.
I can remember, this is one of those times pre-cell camera, right? Now we have some very nice Moultrie mobile cell cameras that we use, but at this point in time, we were just using regular trail cameras, and it's the biggest freak out session I've ever had in the passenger seat of a truck.
Are you ready?
Yes.
It's cartoon, okay?
Oh no. Oh.
How long are the main beams on that deer?
Tyler, what is that?
That's the biggest.
Is that a Boone and Crockett deer?
That's the
Look
biggest.
at those brow tines. They're 6 inches long.
At least.
And from there, we hunted this deer fairly hard.
Mm-hmm.
We made some really smart hunts, I think, and didn't overpressure it. But it was just one of those things where it's a smaller property, so I think that, or a smaller portion of the property at least, so I think that he spent time on and off of the place, and being in East Texas, I just don't see how there's any way this deer didn't get shot.
We had one sequence from the next year, and I think that was about it. The first year we found him was the year he was most visible, and we just, from that point, we didn't have a whole lot of confidence in the spot, and there's a high chance that this deer was shot on a neighboring property just because of how big he was and the effort that somebody would probably likely put in if they had this deer on trail camera as well.
Those are our biggest bucks ever on trail camera. If you like the video, like, subscribe, all that stuff. Really appreciate y'all, and remember, this is your element.
Live in it.